The dust-laden air caught in Victoria Sinclair's throat as the stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Willow Creek's only hotel. She'd traveled over 1,000 miles from Boston with nothing but 2 trunks and a heart full of misplaced hope. Her fiancé had promised a life of comfort on his ranch, but his letters had stopped 6 months ago. Now, she was alone in a frontier town where proper ladies didn't belong, especially not ones abandoned by their betrothed. Victoria descended from the coach, her blue traveling dress already stained with the red dust of Wyoming territory. The year was 1876, and the West was still wild despite the nation's centennial celebrations back east. She straightened her hat and surveyed the dusty Main Street with its wooden buildings and hitching posts. Men paused in their activities to stare at the newcomer, some with curiosity, others with unabashed interest that made her cheeks burn. The stagecoach driver tossed down her trunks without ceremony. "Welcome to Willow Creek, madam." His tone suggested he didn't expect her to last a week. Victoria paid him the last of her traveling money and arranged for her luggage to be taken inside the hotel. She had barely enough funds for a week's lodging. After that, she would need to find employment or return east in shame, neither option appealing to her independent spirit. Inside the modest hotel lobby, Victoria approached the desk clerk, a thin man with spectacles who regarded her with suspicion. "I'm inquiring about Mr. Henry Prescott," she said. "I understand he owns the Double P Ranch outside of town." The clerk's expression shifted from suspicion to pity. "Madam, I'm afraid Mr. Prescott passed away 3 months ago. Influenza took him and his elderly mother both." Victoria gripped the edge of the desk, the room suddenly spinning. "I see," she managed, though she saw nothing but her future crumbling before her eyes. "Were you acquainted with him?" the clerk asked. "I was to be his wife," Victoria said softly. "We were corresponding for over a year. I came to marry him." A soft laugh came from behind her. Victoria turned to find 3 well-dressed women watching her with barely concealed amusement. "Another mail-order bride for poor Henry," said the tallest one, her voice dripping with disdain. "How many hearts did that man break with his promises?" "At least you found out before the wedding," added another. "Though now you're stranded, aren't you? No husband, no prospects." Victoria lifted her chin. "I will manage just fine, thank you. Will you now?" The first woman laughed again. "A proper Eastern lady like yourself. You'll be on the next stage back to wherever you came from." Victoria checked into a room despite the humiliation burning in her chest. She needed time to think, to plan. Her teaching credentials might secure her a position, but the town seemed small, perhaps too small for a school. As she climbed the stairs to her room, she heard more whispers and chuckles. The following morning, Victoria rose early and dressed carefully in her best day dress. If she was to find employment, she needed to make a good impression. She'd inquired about teaching positions at breakfast only to learn the town already had a schoolmarm. The hotel owner's wife had suggested she try the general store, which might need help with bookkeeping. The bell above the door jingled as Victoria entered Willow Creek General Mercantile. The store was well stocked with goods ranging from canned foods to bolts of fabric. A middle-aged couple stood behind the counter, their conversation halting as she entered. "Good morning," Victoria said. "I was told you might need assistance with your accounts." The woman, Mrs. Parker, as Victoria would later learn, looked her up and down. "We manage just fine, dear. Besides, you look like you'd faint at the first sight of a cowboy tracking mud on your clean floors." Victoria opened her mouth to protest when the bell rang again. She turned to see a tall man entering, his broad shoulders nearly filling the doorway. He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair and sun-weathered skin. His blue eyes met hers briefly before he nodded a greeting to the store owners. "Morning, Mr. and Mrs. Parker," he said, his voice deep and pleasant. "Got my order ready?" "Of course, Mr. Wade," Mrs. Parker replied, suddenly all smiles. "Came in on yesterday's freight wagon." Victoria stepped aside as Mr. Parker began gathering supplies. The cowboy Mr. Wade glanced at her again, this time with curiosity. "Don't believe we've met, madam," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Deacon Wade." "Victoria Sinclair," she replied, taking his hand briefly. His grip was firm but gentle. "Miss Sinclair came to marry Henry Prescott, Mrs. Parker announced loudly. "Poor thing arrived too late." Victoria flushed with embarrassment. "I wasn't aware of his passing." "Mails slow out here," Deacon Wade said kindly. "Sorry for your trouble. Thank you, Mr. Wade." Mrs. Parker leaned over the counter. "She's looking for work now, trying to stay in Willow Creek rather than admit defeat," Victoria stiffened. "I hardly consider it defeat to seek honest employment, Mrs. Parker." Deacon Wade was studying her thoughtfully. "You know bookkeeping?" "Yes, and I'm a certified teacher as well." He nodded slowly. "My ranch manager just quit, took off for the gold fields in the Black Hills. I need someone who can keep the books, handle correspondence, maybe teach some of the hands to read. Most can't sign more than an X." Victoria's heart quickened. "Are you offering me a position, Mr. Wade?" "I might be," he replied. "Depends on whether you're willing to live at a working ranch. It's rough country, not like Boston." "How did you know I'm from Boston?" A slight smile touched his lips. "Your accent. Plus, those shoes weren't made for Wyoming dirt." Victoria glanced down at her once fine leather boots, now coated with dust. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Wade, regardless of where I was born." Mrs. Parker laughed outright. A city girl like her on the Triple W, she wouldn't last a week. Other customers in the store joined in the laughter. Victoria felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she kept her gaze steady on Deacon Wade's face. To her surprise, he wasn't laughing. "They'll stop when they see you smile," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Pardon me." "The laughing," he clarified. "They'll stop when they see you're not going anywhere, when they see you succeed." He turned to the Parkers. "Add whatever supplies the lady needs to my order. She starts work tomorrow." Mrs. Parker's mouth fell open. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," he replied. "Miss Sinclair is the new manager of Triple W Ranch Affairs." Victoria could scarcely believe what she was hearing. "Mr. Wade, you don't know anything about me." "I know enough," he said. "I know desperation when I see it, and I know determination too. Besides, I've been trying to fill this position for months. Nobody wants to be stuck out at a ranch when they could be chasing gold or working in town." Victoria considered her limited options. Working at her ranch wasn't what she'd envisioned when she'd traveled west, but it was an opportunity, perhaps her only one. "I accept your offer, Mr. Wade," she said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he warned. "The work is hard, the hours long, and the men aren't used to taking orders from a woman." "I've taught classrooms of 40 boys," Victoria replied. "I can handle a few cowboys." More chuckles rippled through the store. Deacon Wade merely nodded, a glint of approval in his eyes. "We leave at noon," he said. "The ranch is a 3-hour ride from town." After he left, Victoria gathered the essentials she would need: sturdy clothes, practical boots, writing materials. She ignored the stares and whispers that followed her through the store and onto the street. By the time noon approached, word had spread throughout Willow Creek that the abandoned mail-order bride was going to work at the Triple W. A small crowd gathered to watch as Deacon Wade helped her into his wagon. Her trunks were secured in the back, and a beautiful chestnut mare was tethered behind. "That's Marigold," Deacon explained. "She's yours now. Every ranch manager needs a good horse." Victoria had ridden in Boston's parks but never owned a horse. "She's magnificent. She's gentle but spirited. Like someone else I'm beginning to know." There was that slight smile again. As they prepared to depart, the same women who had mocked Victoria at the hotel approached the wagon. "You're really going through with this?" the tall one asked. "Living alone at a ranch with a dozen cowboys?" "I'll have my own quarters," Victoria replied coolly, "and I'll be earning my keep." "But what about finding a husband?" another pressed. "That's why you came west, isn't it?" Victoria felt Deacon Wade stiffen slightly beside her, but his expression remained neutral. "I came west for a new beginning," Victoria answered, "and that's exactly what I'm getting." As the wagon pulled away, laughter and jeers followed them down the street. Victoria kept her back straight and her gaze forward, though each mocking comment stung like a slap. "Don't mind them," Deacon said as they left town behind. "Willow Creek isn't used to women who think for themselves. And you are, Mr. Wade," he gave her a sidelong glance. "My mother raised 5 boys alone after my father died in the war. She ran our farm in Missouri until she passed 3 years ago. I've seen what a determined woman can do." The landscape opened before them, vast grasslands stretching toward distant mountains. The April air was cool but refreshing after the stuffiness of the stagecoach and hotel. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, Victoria felt a sense of possibility. "Tell me about your ranch," she said. Deacon Wade spoke with quiet pride about the W 3,000 acres with 500 head of cattle, 20 horses, and a crew of 8 full-time hands plus seasonal workers during Roundup. He'd built it from nothing after coming west in '68, working first as a drover, then a foreman, saving every penny until he could buy his own land. "It's not the biggest spread in the territory," he admitted, "but it's growing. We've got good water, decent grazing, and I pay fair wages so I keep good men." "And now you've hired a woman," Victoria noted. "I've hired the person who can do the job," he corrected. "Man or woman doesn't matter to me." As the wagon crested a hill, the W came into view. A large 2-story house stood at the center, flanked by a bunkhouse, barn, corrals, and various outbuildings. Cottonwood trees lined a creek that cut through the property. "It's beautiful," Victoria said sincerely. Deacon's expression softened. "It's home." They arrived as the ranch hands were returning from their day's work. The men gathered curiously as Deacon helped Victoria down from the wagon. "Listen up," he called. "This is Miss Victoria Sinclair. She's our new ranch manager. She'll be handling the books, correspondence, and teaching anyone who wants to learn their letters. You'll give her the same respect you'd give me." The men exchanged glances, some doubtful, others amused. A weathered older cowboy with a gray mustache stepped forward. "Charlie Owens, madam. Been with the boss since the beginning. Welcome to W." He tipped his hat. Victoria smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Owens." The others introduced themselves one by one: Tom, Hank, Miguel, Frank, Joe, Sam, and a young boy called Rusty who couldn't have been more than 16. They were cautious but polite, clearly taking their cue from Charlie's acceptance. Deacon showed Victoria to her quarters, a small but comfortable room off the main house with its own entrance. It had a bed, a desk, a dresser, and a small stove for heat. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it's private. You'll take meals with me in the house unless you'd prefer to join the men in the bunkhouse." His slight smile suggested he knew which she would choose. "This is more than adequate, thank you. Rest today. Tomorrow I'll show you the office and we'll start going through the accounts." That evening, after unpacking her belongings, Victoria sat on the small porch outside her room and watched the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The vastness of the land both terrified and exhilarated her. She was farther from Boston than she'd ever imagined she'd be, in circumstances she'd never anticipated. But for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. A movement caught her eye: Deacon Wade walking toward the barn, his long strides eating up the ground. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. When he reached the barn door, he paused and glanced back toward her. Even at a distance, she could feel the weight of his gaze. He raised a hand in greeting before disappearing into the barn. Victoria found herself smiling as she returned the gesture, wondering what tomorrow would bring on the W ranch. The following weeks were a crash course in ranch life for Victoria. She rose before dawn each day, quickly adapting to the rhythm of the W. Deacon was a fair but demanding employer who expected the same level of commitment from her that he did from his cowboys. The ranch office was a mess of paperwork, invoices, receipts, correspondence, and ledgers that hadn't been properly maintained since Deacon's previous manager had left. "I've been trying to keep up," he admitted on her first day, but numbers were never my strong suit. It appears organization wasn't your former manager's either, Victoria remarked, surveying the chaos. Deacon chuckled. Pete was better with cattle than columns. Victoria established a system, working methodically through the backlog while keeping up with new business. She discovered several discrepancies in the accounts that suggested Pete had been skimming funds before his departure. I suspected as much, Deacon said grimly when she showed him the evidence. That's why he left so suddenly for the Black Hills. Wasn't gold he was after, it was getting away before I caught on. You're not as bad with numbers as you claimed, Victoria observed. I can count cattle and calculate profits, he said. It's the details I miss. Details matter, Mr. Wade. Please call me Deacon. Mr. Wade makes me feel like my father. Then you must call me Victoria, she replied. Miss Sinclair sounds like a schoolmarm. But you are a schoolmarm, he pointed out with a smile. Was, she corrected. Now I'm a ranch manager. True to his word, Deacon announced that Victoria would offer reading and writing lessons to any man who wanted to learn. To her surprise, most of them did. 3 evenings a week, after supper, the Cowboys gathered in the main house's dining room where Victoria patiently guided them through their letters. Even Charlie, who initially claimed he was too old for book learning, joined in after the first week. Never too old to better yourself, he said gruffly when Victoria expressed her surprise. Besides, getting mighty tired of asking the boss to read letters from my daughter. Victoria discovered that Rusty, the youngest hand, couldn't read at all. She began giving him extra lessons during the day when he wasn't needed for ranch work. The boy was quick to learn and eagerly soaked up knowledge. Nobody ever bothered to teach me before, he explained. Pa said reading was for rich folks, not for cowboys. Reading is for everyone, Victoria told him firmly. It opens doors to worlds you've never seen. One evening, as Victoria was finishing up a lesson, she glanced up to find Deacon watching from the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. When the men filed out, he remained. You've made quite an impression, he said, gesturing to the slate boards and readers scattered across the table. Charlie's writing to his daughter himself for the first time in 20 years. They're good men, Victoria replied. They just needed a chance. Like you, Deacon asked softly. She met his gaze steadily. Yes, like me. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with something Victoria wasn't ready to name. We ride out early tomorrow for the North Pasture, Deacon finally said. I'd like you to come along. You should see all of the Triple W, understand what we do here. Victoria hesitated. I've never ridden that far. Marigold will take care of you, he assured her, and I'll be right beside you. Then I accept. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Victoria dressed in the practical riding skirt she'd purchased in town and the sturdy boots Deacon had insisted she needed. Her hair was braided and pinned securely under a wide-brimmed hat to protect her fair skin from the sun. Deacon was waiting by the corral with Marigold already saddled. His own mount, a powerful black gelding named Thunder, stood nearby. He looked up as Victoria approached, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. Is something wrong? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. No, he said quickly. You just look. Ready? I am. She approached Marigold, stroking the mare's velvety nose. Good morning, beautiful girl. Deacon helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Victoria was grateful he couldn't see her face as heat crept into her cheeks at his touch. They rode out with Charlie and 2 other hands, heading north across lush spring grass. Wildflowers dotted the landscape in bursts of blue, yellow, and purple. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, a perfect azure dome. Victoria had never experienced such openness, such freedom. She found herself smiling without realizing it. See, Deacon said, riding alongside her. I told you they'd stop when they see you smile. Victoria looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? You're smiling, he said simply. Really smiling, not just being polite. It suits you. Before she could respond, Charlie called Deacon's attention to a break in the fence line ahead. The moment passed, but Victoria carried his words with her throughout the day as they rode the boundaries of the Triple W. Deacon showed her everything: the best grazing lands, the water sources, the places where the fences needed mending. He spoke of his plans for the ranch, expanding the herd, breeding better stock, perhaps adding sheep despite the controversy that would cause among neighboring cattle ranchers. "You have vision," Victoria observed as they paused atop a ridge overlooking a verdant valley. "Had to," he replied. "You don't build something from nothing without seeing what could be instead of what is." Victoria thought about her own journey, how she'd envisioned a life with Henry Prescott that would never come to pass. Yet here she was, creating something entirely different. "I understand," she said softly. Deacon studied her face. "I believe you do." They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, tired but invigorated. Victoria was sore from the long ride, but she felt a sense of accomplishment. She belonged here, at least for now, in this wild, beautiful place. As the weeks passed, Victoria settled into life at the Triple W. Spring Roundup came, bringing with it backbreaking work for everyone on the ranch. Even Victoria found herself helping in ways she never would have imagined in Boston, counting cattle, preparing meals for hungry cowboys, treating minor injuries, and keeping track of which calves belonged to which cows. "You're not what I expected," Charlie told her one evening as she bandaged a cut on his hand. "What did you expect?" Victoria asked, tying off the bandage neatly. "A fancy Eastern lady who'd run back to town crying after the first dust storm." He flexed his hand, testing her work. "But you're made of sterner stuff, Miss Victoria." "Thank you, Charlie, I'll take that as a compliment." "Meant it as one." The old cowboy hesitated, then added, "Boss thinks so too, never seen him take to someone like he has to you." Victoria busied herself with putting away the medical supplies, hoping Charlie wouldn't notice her blush. She tried to maintain a strictly professional relationship with Deacon, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore her growing feelings for him. They spent hours together each day, discussing ranch business, sharing meals, occasionally reading together in the evening when the day's work was done. Deacon was well-read despite his frontier upbringing, and their conversations ranged from literature to politics to the future of the West. "He's a good employer," Victoria said carefully. Charlie snorted. "Wasn't talking about employment, madam." Before Victoria could respond, Deacon himself entered the bunkhouse. "Everything all right in here?" "Right as rain, boss," Charlie replied, getting to his feet. "Miss Victoria fixed me up good." He winked at her before heading outside, leaving them alone. Deacon looked at Victoria questioningly. "What was that about?" "Charlie was just thanking me for the bandage," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "HM?" Deacon didn't sound convinced. "I came to tell you we need to ride into town tomorrow. Got a telegram about a cattle buyer coming through. Thought you should be there for the negotiations." "Of course," Victoria agreed, gathering her medical kit. "What time should I be ready?" "Early. We'll stay overnight. The hotel has rooms." He paused. "It'll be your first time back in Willow Creek since you started here." Victoria hadn't thought about that. It had been nearly 2 months since she'd left town amidst laughter and ridicule. "I suppose it will. People talk," Deacon said carefully, "about you living out here." "Let them," Victoria replied with more confidence than she felt. "I have nothing to be ashamed of." Deacon studied her for a long moment. "No, you don't. You've earned your place here, Victoria. Don't let anyone tell you different." The next morning they set out for town. The ride was pleasant, with late spring sunshine warming the air and wildflowers in full bloom across the prairie. Victoria rode beside Deacon, their conversation easy and comfortable. He told her stories of his early days in Wyoming territory, of the characters he'd met and the challenges he'd faced. "What made you stay?" she asked. "When so many others moved on," Deacon thought for a moment. "This land gets under your skin." "The first time I rode through that valley we saw together, I knew this was where I belonged. Some places just claim you." Victoria understood. The Triple W was beginning to claim her too in ways she hadn't expected. As they approached Willow Creek, Victoria's nervousness grew. She straightened in the saddle, adjusting her hat and smoothing her riding skirt. Deacon noticed her fidgeting. "Remember what I told you," he said. "They'll stop when they see you smile." The main street was busy when they rode in. Heads turned as they passed, and Victoria heard whispers following them like ripples in a pond. She kept her chin up and her back straight, the way her mother had taught her a proper lady should. They stopped first at the telegraph office, where Deacon collected a stack of messages. The operator raised his eyebrows at the sight of Victoria. "Well, look who's still in Wyoming," he remarked. "Thought you'd have headed back east by now, Miss Sinclair." "As you can see, I'm quite content where I am," Victoria replied coolly. Next, they visited the bank, where Deacon introduced Victoria as his ranch manager. The banker, a portly man named Mr. Williams, nearly choked on his surprise. "Your ranch manager," he repeated. "A woman, the best manager I've ever had," Deacon said firmly. "She uncovered embezzlement that had been going on for months, straightened out our accounts, and increased our efficiency considerably." Mr. Williams adjusted his spectacles. "Is that so? Well, Miss Sinclair, I must say this is unexpected." "Life often is, Mr. Williams," Victoria replied with a polite smile. As they left the bank, Victoria caught sight of Mrs. Parker and her friends outside the general store. The women stared openly, their expressions a mixture of shock and disapproval. Victoria nodded courteously in their direction before continuing down the street beside Deacon. "You're handling this well," he murmured. "I'm pretending I'm at a Boston society event," Victoria confided. "The gossip is just as vicious, but the dresses are better." Deacon's laugh drew even more attention. "You continue to surprise me, Victoria Sinclair." They completed their errands and checked into the hotel. Victoria was given the same room she'd occupied on her first night in Willow Creek, which felt like a lifetime ago. After freshening up, she met Deacon for dinner in the hotel's small dining room. They were discussing the cattle buyer's anticipated offer when the dining room door opened, and a hush fell over the room. A well-dressed man entered, accompanied by the same three women who had mocked Victoria upon her arrival. The man paused when he spotted Victoria, his face registering shock. "Miss Sinclair," he exclaimed. "Is that really you?" Victoria recognized him immediately. "Mr. Prescott." "Henry Prescott," Deacon said flatly. "I thought you were dead." The man had the grace to look embarrassed. "Reports of my demise were exaggerated." He approached their table. "Miss Sinclair, please allow me to explain." Victoria's mind was reeling. Henry Prescott, the man she'd traveled across the country to marry, was very much alive. Yet all she felt was a strange detachment, as if she were watching a play unfold rather than living it. "I think you owe Miss Sinclair more than an explanation," Deacon said, his voice dangerously calm. "You owe her an apology." "Yes, of course," Henry agreed quickly. "Victoria, Miss Sinclair, I never meant to deceive you. I was gravely ill and my mother thought it best to end our arrangement rather than have you travel all this way only to become a nurse or worse, a widow." "Your mother died of influenza," Victoria said. "That much was true," Henry nodded. "Yes, I nearly followed her. By the time I recovered, I assumed you would have made other arrangements." "What other arrangements could she make?" Deacon demanded. "She traveled 1,000 miles on the promise of marriage, only to find herself abandoned in a strange town." The dining room was silent, everyone straining to hear the drama unfolding. Victoria realized that she was at a crossroads. She could accept Henry's explanation, perhaps even renew their engagement. After all, that was why she had come west. Or she could acknowledge what she already knew in her heart, that fate had led her to where she truly belonged. "Mr. Prescott," she said clearly, "I appreciate your explanation. However, circumstances have indeed changed." She looked at Deacon, drawing strength from the steady blue of his eyes. "I have found my place here." Henry looked between them, understanding dawning on his face. "I see, you and Mr. Wade are." Miss Sinclair is my ranch manager, Deacon said, though something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. One of the women who had accompanied Henry laughed softly. A female ranch manager? How progressive. Victoria has proven herself more than capable, Deacon replied. More than can be said for some who have lived here all their lives yet contributed nothing of value to the community. The woman flushed angrily. Henry cleared his throat. Well, I wish you both the best, if you'll excuse us. He guided his companion to another table where they immediately began whispering with the others. Victoria released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? Deacon asked. For defending me. For believing in me when no one else did. His expression softened. You've more than justified my faith in you, Victoria. The rest of their meal passed in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they finished, Deacon escorted Victoria to her room. Get some rest, he said at her door. We meet the cattle buyer at 9 tomorrow. Victoria nodded but hesitated before entering her room. Deacon, seeing Henry alive. It doesn't change anything for me, I want you to know that. Something flickered in his eyes, relief perhaps, or hope. Good night, Victoria. Good night, Deacon. The following morning, Victoria dressed with particular care in her best business attire, a navy blue skirt and jacket with a crisp white blouse. She arranged her hair neatly and pinned a cameo brooch at her throat. When she met Deacon in the lobby, he stared at her for a moment before finding his voice. You look formidable, he said with approval. That's the intention, she replied with a smile. I believe we're negotiating a significant contract today. The cattle buyer, Mr. Jenkins, was clearly surprised to find a woman participating in the negotiations, but Deacon made it clear from the start that Victoria was an equal partner in the discussion. She had prepared thoroughly, bringing detailed records of the WWTK stock, quality assessments, and previous sale prices. When Jenkins attempted to lowball their price, Victoria calmly presented evidence of what comparable herds had sold for in recent months. When he complained about the distance to the railroad, she produced a map showing that the WW was actually closer than most competing ranches. By the end of the meeting, they had secured a price 15% higher than Jenkins' initial offer. As the buyer left to consider the terms, he tipped his hat to Victoria. Madam, I've been buying cattle for 20 years, and I've never been so thoroughly outmatched. Mr. Wade is fortunate to have you. The feeling is mutual, Deacon said, giving Victoria a smile that warmed her from the inside out. They stepped onto the hotel porch to find a small crowd gathered in the street. Henry Prescott was mounting a horse, apparently preparing to leave town. When he spotted Victoria, he approached the porch. I'm heading back to my ranch, he said. I wanted to apologize again for the misunderstanding. You deserved better treatment. Thank you, Mr. Prescott, Victoria replied. I wish you well. Henry glanced at Deacon, then back to Victoria. It appears things worked out for the best, after all. As he rode away, Victoria noticed the townspeople watching her with new eyes. The laughter and whispers had been replaced by something else, a grudging respect, perhaps, or at least curiosity. Mrs. Parker stood nearby with her friends, their expressions unreadable. Victoria smiled at them, a genuine smile that reflected her contentment with the life she'd found. One by one, they nodded in acknowledgement before turning away. See, Deacon said softly beside her. They stop when they see you smile. They returned to the WW that afternoon, riding side by side across the rolling grasslands. The ranch appeared on the horizon like a welcome sight home in a way Boston had never been. As they approached the main house, Charlie came out to greet them. Everything all right in town? He asked, taking their horses. Better than all right, Deacon replied. Victoria negotiated the best cattle price we've ever gotten, Charlie grinned. Never doubted she would. That evening after supper, Victoria sat on her small porch watching the sunset. The air was warm, fragrant with sage and wildflowers. In the distance, she could hear the cowboys singing around their campfire, a low, melodious sound that drifted on the breeze. Footsteps approached and Deacon appeared, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Victoria before sitting beside her on the porch step. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. Victoria sipped her coffee. "I was thinking about how different my life is from what I imagined when I left Boston. I came west to marry a man I barely knew to be a rancher's wife." She smiled. "Instead, I'm a ranch manager who can negotiate with cattle buyers and teach cowboys to read." "Do you regret it?" Deacon asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Now that you know Henry's alive, you could still have the life you planned." Victoria turned to look at him directly. "Why would I want that life when this one suits me so much better?" Something changed in Deacon's expression, a softening around his eyes. "Does it suit you?" "Very much," she said softly, "though there are aspects that remain unresolved." Deacon set down his coffee cup. "Such as?" Victoria gathered her courage. "My feelings for a certain rancher, for one, and whether he might share those feelings." For a moment, Deacon was still, his gaze fixed on her face as if memorizing every feature. Then he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. "Victoria," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been falling in love with you since the day you stood in that general store and refused to be laughed out of town." Her heart soared. "Truly. I've never been more serious about anything in my life." He moved closer, his free hand gently touching her cheek. "I didn't want to speak too soon, to pressure you when you were dependent on this job, but seeing you with Henry yesterday made me realize I might lose you if I waited too long." "You weren't going to lose me," Victoria assured him. "My heart had already chosen you." When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. Victoria answered by sliding her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. The kiss deepened, and Victoria felt as if every moment of her life had been leading to this, to Deacon, to the triple W, to the wide open sky and endless possibilities of Wyoming. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Deacon pressed his forehead to hers. "Marry me, Victoria. Not because you need a husband or because you came west to be married, but because we belong together." "Yes," she whispered, her heart full to bursting. "Yes, I'll marry you, Deacon Wade." News of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch. Charlie and the other hands offered hearty congratulations, seeming genuinely pleased. Rusty presented Victoria with a handmade wooden box for her writing supplies, his face flushed with pride when she exclaimed over its craftsmanship. "Never thought the boss would get hitched," Charlie confided to Victoria one afternoon as they watched Deacon breaking a new horse in the corral. "Always figured the triple W was wife enough for him, but you changed that." "He changed me too," Victoria replied. "I came west thinking I knew what I wanted, but I had no idea." They decided to marry in July, after the spring work was completed, but before the fall roundup began. Victoria rode into Willow Creek to order fabric for a wedding dress, nervous about the reception she might receive. To her surprise, Mrs. Parker greeted her warmly. "Heard you're marrying Deacon Wade," the shopkeeper said as she showed Victoria the available fabrics. "Smart choice. He's the finest man in the territory." "I think so too," Victoria agreed, selecting a cream-colored silk. Mrs. Parker cut the fabric with precision. "We may have gotten off on the wrong foot, Miss Sinclair. Truth is, we've seen too many Eastern ladies come out here with grand ideas only to turn tail at the first hardship." "I understand," Victoria said. "The West isn't for everyone." "No, it isn't, Mrs. Parker agreed. "But it suits you. Anyone can see that now." By the time Victoria left the store, she'd been invited to join the Ladies' Aid Society and had promised to help organize the town's Independence Day celebration. The same women who had laughed at her now sought her advice on everything from bookkeeping to garden plants. "They've stopped laughing," she told Deacon that night as they sat together on the porch. He smiled, drawing her close. "I told you they would." The wedding was held at the Triple W, with guests from the ranch and town gathered in the yard between the main house and the bunkhouse. Rusty had spent weeks building an archway, which Charlie and the men decorated with wildflowers gathered from the surrounding hills. Victoria wore her cream silk dress, trimmed with lace she'd brought from Boston, and carried a bouquet of prairie roses. Deacon waited for her beneath the archway, looking handsome and somewhat nervous in a new black suit. When Victoria appeared on Charlie's arm, the old cowboy having proudly accepted the honor of giving her away, Deacon's face transformed with a smile so radiant it brought tears to her eyes. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony as the afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Deacon kissed Victoria with such tenderness that several of the ladies dabbed at their eyes. Even Mrs. Parker was seen wiping away a tear. The celebration continued well into the night, with a feast prepared by the ranch cook and supplemented by dishes from the townswomen, music provided by cowboys with surprising talents on fiddle and harmonica, and dancing under the stars. Victoria moved from guest to guest, her happiness evident in the glow of her face and the warmth of her smile. Later, as the party continued around them, Deacon led Victoria away from the crowd, toward a stand of cottonwoods by the creek. The summer night was warm, the air sweet with the scent of grass and flowers. Moonlight silvered the landscape, turning the familiar ranch into something magical. "Happy, Mrs. Wade?" Deacon asked, drawing her into his arms. "Completely," Victoria replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "When I built this ranch, I thought it was everything I wanted. Now I realize it was just waiting for you." Victoria's heart swelled with love. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. For seeing what I could be instead of what I was." "I just saw you, Victoria," he said simply. "The real you, beneath the proper Boston exterior." They walked slowly back toward the celebration, hand in hand. Victoria thought about the journey that had brought her here, the disappointments and challenges, the laughter that had once stung but now seemed insignificant. She had found her place in this wild, beautiful country, with a man who loved her not despite her determination and independence but because of them. As they rejoined their guests, Victoria smiled, radiant with happiness and the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. And just as Deacon had predicted, no one was laughing anymore. In the years that followed, the Triple W prospered under their joint management. Victoria and Deacon worked side by side, each contributing their strengths to building something remarkable. The ranch expanded, adding sheep despite the initial controversy, and became known throughout the territory for its progressive practices and fair treatment of workers. Victoria's reading classes evolved into a proper school for the children of ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders. The small classroom Deacon built adjacent to the main house was filled with eager young minds, and Victoria found herself once again embracing her teaching skills, though in a very different setting from what she'd envisioned in Boston. Their first child, a daughter they named Margaret after Deacon's mother, arrived a year after their wedding. She was followed 2 years later by a son, James, and eventually by another daughter, Elizabeth. The children grew up strong and capable, as comfortable on horseback as they were with books. When Henry Prescott's ranch fell on hard times during a particularly harsh winter, it was Deacon and Victoria who offered assistance, providing feed for his struggling herd and eventually purchasing the adjoining property at a fair price. The acquisition doubled the size of the Triple W and secured its position as one of the most successful operations in the territory. 10 years after their wedding, Deacon and Victoria hosted a grand celebration at the ranch. The original hands were still there: Charlie, now gray-haired but still spry, Rusty, grown into a skilled foreman, and the others who had become like family. Townspeople who had once mocked Victoria now pointed to her with pride when visitors came through, claiming friendship with the smartest woman in Wyoming territory. As dusk fell on the celebration, Victoria found Deacon standing alone on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play with the ranch dogs in the yard. "What are you thinking about, my love?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. He smiled down at her, the same smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "I was remembering what I told you that day in the general store, about how they'd stop laughing when they saw you smile." Victoria leaned against his shoulder. "You were right." "I usually am," he teased, earning an elbow in his ribs. "But in this case, I had no idea how right. You didn't just stop their laughter, Victoria. You changed this place, the ranch, the town, me, all of it for the better." Victoria thought about the frightened but determined young woman who had stepped off that stage coach a decade ago, heartbroken and alone. "We changed each other," she said softly, "and I wouldn't change a moment of it." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Deacon drew her close for a kiss that held all the passion and tenderness of their first. Around them, the Triple W Ranch stretched out in all directions, a testament to what could be built when two people faced the world together, unafraid of laughter or hardship, confident in the strength of their love and the rightness of their path. And Victoria Sinclair Wade, once an out-of-place Boston lady, now the heart of this thriving ranch and community, smiled the smile of a woman who had truly found her home.